Hello and welcome to FutureWerx. My name is Priechenfried, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director under the corporate sponsorship of Threat Tech LLC, where reality matters. The goal of FutureWerx is to build and sustain an ecosystem across industry, academia, and government partners to explore the conflict topography of tomorrow through the lens of emerging and frontier technologies. I'm honored and I'm privileged today to be able to discuss this effort with Mr. Dennis Bushnell. Dennis has an extraordinary biography with more than 6 decades of incredible service to our nation. Amongst them serving as the senior and chief scientist of NASA for more than 28 years, and serving as the founder and leader of the Mad Scientist program from 1998 until I think approximately 2011, Dennis? 2012, for Army TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command G2. And that's what I'm hoping that we can discuss today, Dennis, a little bit, exploring that history of the Mad Scientist effort that you founded and you led for many years. Dennis, I was hoping if you could talk to us a little bit about the genesis of Mad Scientist. What caused this effort to emerge in 1998?
I was involved in the national security redo after the wall went down. There were efforts by all of the services to figure out what their futures were and how they're going to work together and so forth and so on. So we started having war games, and they got me involved. And I was the chief tech advisor to the Red Sink at the Spring War Games at Carlisle. And I put up a bunch of techs that Red should have walked away with. And the referees and the people running the games disallowed the techs. They didn't understand it. And I got upset and came home, and TRADOC was just down the street from NASA. So I went down and talked to the 3-star that was in charge of futures at TRADOC. And I told him my experience. And I said TRADOC needed a tech operation to prepare people for the Spring War Games so that they understood what the real laydown was going into the future with respect to technology as applicable to national security. And he said, well, there's a fine officer coming off of running intelligence over in Kosovo, and so I'll have him work with you, and yes, we're going to do this. And so Maxie McFarland came back and took over Descent over at the TRADOC. And Maxie and I proceeded to figure out how to do a tech war game. And it took us a couple of years to figure out how to do it right, or almost right, or at least fairly effective. But what we were after with this whole thing, and still am, and I'm worried we're still not doing it well now, is to determine the capabilities of the enemy after next. The things that we build, the equipage, it generally takes us up to a couple of decades to get it in the inventory. And it's in the inventory for 2, 3, 4 decades. All right, there was not much, and I looked all over to try to find this, and it just wasn't there. And this is why I kept doing this all these decades. Not much effort to determine the capabilities of the enemy after next. And Maxie would decide to me what the theme of the year was. All right, whether it was how do we keep air dominance or whatever. And I would figure out what are the tech issues going forward for that, and I would ferret out the best techies in the country. And if it was a classified thing, whether or not they had the clearances, who had what was going to happen going forward. Okay. And this is all preceded by the fact that the tech landscape worldwide is absolutely flat. You can buy just about any technology with a credit card, and right now today, as an example, there's some 46 frontier technologies, the very best, and right now China is ahead of us in 36 of those. So it's very, very necessary to stay up to date, both with respect to what the technologies are and how they can be employed in warfare, any kind of warfare, including all domain warfare and so forth and so on, and then how to prevail against them. But you need to know what business you're in to start off with. So in order to prevail going forward, you need to figure out what are the capabilities you're going to be after next and how are they going to use them. For decades, I've kind of been at the forefront, operating out of NASA, on trying to bring to all of the services. At one time, I was doing some 26 lectures a year throughout the commands, throughout the services, throughout the building, throughout the intel community on techs, threats, vulnerabilities, and the nature of future warfare as informed by partially med scientists. What we were doing was beyond what most people's job jar was faced with. It really was the capabilities of the enemy after next, not even the next guy. Okay.
Well,
anyway.
I was hoping you could give some examples of some of the kinds of technologies
this is what we came up with in that 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially what you're faced with now. Serious capable AI, swarms, increasingly capable and cheap multi-physics sensors, the rise of China, because initially the intelligence community told me, this is back in the mid to later 90s, we're not worried about China, okay? We said, you better be. And then we also brought in robotics, fire ant warfare, machine sense making, quantum technologies, anti-space, Havana, i.e. attriting brains, microspace, and printing manufacturing. All of this came out of that 12 years of mad scientists, and it's what you're faced with now. Right. There were other technologies that we identified in Mad Scientist 1 that are still in development with major impacts on national security. These include geophysical warfare, energetics about to come online with 10,000 times chemical energy density, which will enable people to loiter as long as they want and all kinds of other things. Several cheap Mach 20 massive Connecticut swarms where you can deploy out of CONUS instead of using, going across the ponds with all kinds of people. Tens of thousands of global precision strike from CONUS. Non-nuke tactical EMP and advanced EMP right through the cages. Global sensor grid, trillions of sensors, which we worked with Andy Marshall up in the Pentagon for a while. Havana RF against brains. Quantum non-EM communications, i.e. not electromagnetics. Okay, that's coming fast now. Cyber writ large, which the U.S. does not do well at all. Global mind. Designer biologics, vulnerabilities while still shrink-wrapped en route to the away game, that's to where they're going to take us down, over the ponds and flying over the ponds. And thermobarics at the 8 hertz frequency, the hollow organs, which the Marines are terrified of.
I mean, Dennis, when I think about that list, and we've talked about this a couple of times, that's an extraordinary list of what are still emerging technologies today. The fact that you were looking at these 15, 20 years ago really speaks to how far forward in the future this effort was looking, almost as you describe it in a very novel sense, to be able to look that far ahead.
Well, I would figure out what the emerging technologies were and kind of sort of figure out what their use might be, and even a little bit of initial thought on how to win. But then I would contact, for each of these mad scientist things, the really best techies, the really imaginative techies, the ones that people that they work for keep in the background because they don't mix well with other people, okay? And they're the tech mavericks, which now that we're faced with the generating wealth by inventing things, the Harvard Business Review says these are the people that the industry's future depends on. I had these really great people who came pro bono because I asked them, okay? And we would spend the first day on what we called adult education to try to bring up, these people would brief on their technologies to try to bring up the national security people so that they could understand going into the breakouts.
Establishing a common frame of knowledge, really, for that tech workshop.
That's what we tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then we had breakouts, and we would have leaders for the breakouts. In the breakouts, we would spend the first time giving each person in the breakout group faced airtime to get it out, because by this time they would have some ideas, and so we let them say it, okay, get it out, and so that they weren't disruptive later on. And that worked great. And then we would try to come to some kind of conclusions. We would have the usual briefback. And then I would put together a summary of what I thought were the cogent things. And then we, for all 3 or 4 groups after the briefback. What I think is missing today is anything like what I've just gone through, and trying to determine the capabilities of the enemy after next, so that we will then be able to figure out how to prevail without beggaring the nation.
Dennis, when we started this, I asked you the question about the origination of the Mad Scientist program, and you talked about the war game not being well postured to accept frontier level technologies and those impacts. Obviously war games weren't built to do that. They were, at least at the time, they were looking much more near term. How well did the war game process then work to allow the inputs that were coming from this technology workshop, as the Mad Scientist program matured?
All right. What you're talking about is after Mad Scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After Mad Scientist, I continued to brief people. I worked a lot with SOCOM and JSOC and other people. And also a lot with the Marines and the Navy. And the forward-facing enemy after next work has been drawn way back. uh, there's not much, war is now a tech game. It's increasingly a home game because it's a tech game. And the whole business of trying to protect Conus from its huge vulnerabilities, that's a whole separate discussion. But there's little understanding because they're not trained. All right. I had a standing brief every year up at Carlisle for 6-8 years. And they told me after the first year that they were having to spend days to educate the people hearing this, which was the whole, all the students and the faculty and everybody else. I was in a big auditorium each time to understand a little bit of what I was talking about. Okay. So they don't have the tech background to figure out what's coming. Okay. And because the people running things, I've been told only about 15% of the flags, admirals, generals, have a serious tech background. So they're making decisions based upon not all of the tech information, which is not given to them by the people in much of the supporting staffs for the flags, because they don't have the tech background. Okay. And you're now facing, as I said, superb technology people. At one time, asked by the 4-star at the TRADOC about their new armament system. And he wanted me to do a red team on it. And I said, no. He says, nobody tells me no. What are you talking about? And I said, this is 23 robots held together by electrons, and I'm going to kill your electrons. And everything stops. And he says, oh. And that whole system was brought down and we didn't build it.
This conversation really reinforces to me the importance and the power of storytelling. How do we take and transform, hard technologies, very technical issues and subjects, and turn them into easily understandable stories? I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of my passion for science fiction literature. That would take this conversation in directions we're not looking to take it today. But what the core of that is that that literature is one method by which we can examine very closely future technologies, future capabilities beyond the bounds of today's constraints and realities. I worry too. I'm not a scientist. I do not have a hard science or technical background, but I like to think I have an active imagination. Now, how do I ground that imagination so that I don't think about an adversary who's 10 feet tall, but at the same time, I'm not dismissive of emerging capabilities merely because I don't understand them? What would your advice be to those like me that don't have that hard technology or that hard science background to ensure that we are still reading and paying attention to what's happening in the world in ways that posture us to be able to respond or proactively take measures to posture us to continue to be successful?
Well, you've got something coming along that'll help a lot. It's called AI. You may not have to do it. You can ask the AI to do it. Because trying to take the marching army, literally cadre of national security people, and educate them in tech is a daunting task, and we don't have the time or the treasure to do that. But if you're really savvy about AI and this new AI, where we have uh, put in for the information the web, which is infinitely more than any individual or small cadre of humans know, and which operates at speeds which are many, many orders of magnitude faster than humans, and now can operate like humans create, all right? And you can get creative solution spaces out of AI. Okay. I run with the people that do futures for the UN and all kinds of other stuff. And the first thing I do is try to get them to decide what business they're in. And for national security, the business they're in is to prevail against the capabilities of the enemy after next. And if you don't define that business, you're dead in the water. Okay? So what you need to do is to do like we did with Mad Scientist 1, which is to access the frontiers of the responsibly imaginable. All of this stuff is expensive. It needs to be really well grounded, but it needs to be grounded with the tech mavericks. There's not that many of them around that deal with the frontiers of the responsibly imaginable.
Dennis, as we look to kind of wrap this conversation up, I'm only bounded by time because I think this is a worthy conversation that should be going on for hours, not the few minutes that we have allocated for it today. And I would hope to invite you back at a future podcast here to further explore this. But as we look to bring this close, and by the way, I'm gonna steal your term, frontiers of the responsibly imaginable. It's a very artful phrase that is bounding what we're talking about, not pure fiction, but responsibly imaginable. I like that term. You're honoring us. We've talked about FutureWerx several times, and you're honoring us with your presence here today to be able to explore this thinking about the future, this thinking about adversary after next. What parting thoughts would you have or advice towards me and towards the FutureWerx effort as we continue to establish this and move this into the ecosystem of dialogue and national security interests, along with the other Works organizations, along with DARPA, who's looking towards the future, Army Futures Command. There are some entities that are looking, across this different space. We hope to join that conversation, to tie some of those conversations together and really leverage the power of storytelling. So your parting shots, your advice on us as we attempt to lead this effort into the future.
People are way too ingrained with their current job jar and what they're facing with and what they're trying to get out the door in the next year, 2 or 5 years. Okay. And that's not sufficient at all. And the original mad scientist, the one that was techie, that was an attempt. And that came out of the realization at that spring war game at Carlisle in probably 98, that they just weren't thinking like this. And there were war games that the Marines were holding about that time, and there was a very famous Marine general who ended up telling people, no. Andy Marshall at Net Assessment for a while was have not thought through what business we're in. That's it.
Well, we certainly hope to drive the dialogue and the conversation through this FutureWerx effort. We absolutely agree with you on the imperative, the necessary drive to have this conversation and to posture us for the future. Dennis, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I want to thank you for, frankly, the mentoring and advice you've been giving me for at least the last month or so that we've been talking about this. I think going back a couple of months now, as we launched FutureWerx and get this this effort, underway and build up the momentum in this team. And we look forward to future conversations with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, honor and privilege.